The best place to get started with your build is the empennage kit. It's by far the easiest and the fastest of the kits to put together, and it's a really good way to get an understanding and familiarize yourself with the build process that you can use throughout the entire build without all the extra complexities that the wings and the fuselage and the other kits have. I've already got the top taken off this kit here, but you'll see nice and neatly packed on top of every kit is the build manual and the packing list for that particular kit. In addition to that, the empennage comes with the KAI, the kit assembly instructions, and this is a really good top-level overview of what's expected of you as the builder throughout the build, as well as best practices, tool lists, torque values for your AN bolts, etc. So you're going to want to get a thorough understanding and read through this before you dive into the physical build itself. The next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to inventory your kit against the packing list. And so anything that might have been back ordered or damaged during shipping, you can get those replacement parts ordered up as soon as possible so that you can help avoid any unnecessary delays down the line. The best way to inventory your parts is as you're removing them from the box and checking them off on your packing list, hang them up on either the wall, a board, pegboard carts like what I've got set up here. Basically the goal is just to keep yourself organized and have your parts visually accessible so you don't spend a lot of time looking for them when you need them. As I remove them and check them off, I hang them up in groups based on what component they're for or what area of the build they're going to be for. It's good to get a standardized system set up right now from the very beginning that you're going to follow throughout the build, just so you can avoid any complications as things get a lot more complex down the line. Once you've got your kits unpacked and inventoried and you've gone through the KAI, it's time to start building your plane. So all of your parts are going to come wrapped in this plastic film. Most of the parts are going to have the clear plastic. Some of them will have a blue plastic, and let me tell you, when you get a blue one, it's going to make your day because the blue just peels off so easily compared to the clear. But basically the goal of all of it is the same. It keeps the part protected from the elements while it's sitting and waiting for you to actually construct it. So your first step is going to be to peel off this plastic film here. And the main goal while you're doing this is to not bend, twist, contort, or stretch your parts at all. The plastic is adhered fairly well to the part. So as you can see here, it takes a little bit of finesse, but taking just small bits at a time and working your way slowly from one side of the part to the other, you should be able to get it done. And you'll find a process that works best for you. But like I said, the main thing is just to not damage your part during this process. So as you can see, it starts peeling. And once you get it started, it's a lot easier. So we're basically just going to take this part and we're going to walk through the entire process with this particular part. And this is actually a fuel tank rib, but the process is the same for almost every single component on the entire plane. So once you've got it peeled off, I'll do the inside in a second here. Once you've got everything peeled off, we can move to dimpling. Now it's time to dimple the parts, and for dimpling, there's a couple things to make note of. First, your hole size dictates which dimple dies you need to use. So these are for 3.2 millimeter rivets, so we're going to use the dimple dies for the correct size rivet. When you're dimpling for a 4 millimeter rivet, it's the larger pin for the dimple die. So just keep that in mind, make sure you've got the right dies for the right size holes, and also make sure that you take note of which holes need to be dimpled from the manual. So this particular rib actually gets all of the holes on both sides here and here dimpled, so I don't need to do this step, but sometimes you'll have a part that needs to be dimpled, say, from here to here. And what I like to do is I like to mark out where to stop my dimples, and so that just makes sure I don't dimple the wrong holes. Now this process can be done with the plastic on the part, so it helps a little bit to keep the surface of the part a little bit nicer. and it prevents a little bit of possible scratching or anything. But keep in mind, if you do choose to dimple with the plastic on, you're slowly going to build up plastic down in the open end of your dimple die, and so you're going to periodically need to clean that out to make sure that the dies can make a full connection to each other rather than kind of getting stopped up here because of that plastic buildup. So I use the DRDT2 dimpler, and I highly recommend this one over the hammer whacking ones or the handheld ones. It does a great job. It makes a perfect dimple every time. As you can see, I've got it built on a cart here with casters, and I've also got it built so that the bottom side of this dimple die here is exactly flush at the same height as this table. It's actually not this table, it's built for another one in the shop, but you get the idea. So when it comes time to dimple your skins, you can lay the skin out on the table and have the holes that need to be dimpled just kind of off hanging over here. So that way everything is resting nicely and you can get this job done a lot easier. Also, building this onto some casters helps me move it around the shop, move it down the line of a long line of dimples or what have you. So when it comes time to actually dimple the part, you want to make sure that you're holding it exactly parallel with the flange that's being dimpled or the face of the material that's being dimpled to your die. If you're holding it like this, you'll end up warping and damaging this part. And so the best way to do it is to line up the pin like that. And then if you see, if I'm holding pressure, I can actually come crooked, but if you just release the pressure on a small part like this, it comes very easy and it kind of levels itself out. And then you can release. And for each dimple, you follow the same process and you'll have nice clean dimples the whole way along your part. So because of this need to be exactly parallel to your die, that's why I have this built so that my part can sit on the table and hang off just where I need to be dimpling. And it makes the process a lot easier rather than trying to hold the whole skin kind of level to the part or to the dimpler. So you'll find that something like this does come in really handy. Let me show you what a part does here if you accidentally dimple it crooked. So if you were to accidentally dimple a part crooked, so this is basically just a scrap piece of aluminum that I cut with some tin snips, and I bent a flange into it to simulate like the rib flange. And so what would happen if you dimple it crooked is this. So you see this wave in the part now. And it can actually be a lot more extreme than that, right? So if I were to be holding the part crooked in this direction, and of course these are extreme examples here that I'm trying to show, but yeah, if it's crooked in this direction, you can bend it, away. And so this is really going to put a damper on the future of this part. You could potentially damage it beyond repair and you'll need to replace it. But even something like this is, you're going to have to come back through with some hand seamers or something to bend it kind of back into shape, and then you're still going to have that nick. And this part is likely borderline damage beyond repair. So just keep that in mind and be careful to keep everything perfectly parallel to your dimpler when you actually pull that lever down. Also, you want to make sure to pull the lever all the way down and make a nice solid dimple. You don't want to just touch it and call it good enough. And lastly, another thing to keep in mind when you're dimpling is your dimple, the pin on the dimple die shouldn't just fall into the hole. So the holes that need to be dimpled are drilled just slightly undersized from those that don't. And if this pin were to just fall straight in, it would be that particular hole does not need to be dimpled, at least not with this particular dimple die. It's possible that you need to dimple, but it needs to be a 4mm rivet. And it's also possible that you're dimpling too far. So just keep that in mind and double, triple check everything that needs to be dimpled, because once it's dimpled, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to get it back to its original state. And there's potential that that part will need to be replaced. The process for dimpling the skins is basically the same as the ribs, but as you can see here, the skin can potentially be much larger than a rib. So that's why I was mentioning that I've got this dimple rig set up. So it's on casters and it can easily be moved around, and it's also exactly at the same height as my table here. So that way I can let the skin overhang and meet the dimpler exactly where I want it to be. So you see here, it's easy to reposition everything. And I've actually got my dimple dies switched here. It's just easier for this particular skin to rest as you see it here, rather than trying to work with it upside down. You can go ahead and switch the dies. Just always make sure that you're using it in the right direction. So then you can basically just move along and dimple your entire skin like this. And the process is very easy. It doesn't require a second person to hold it all for you. So I'm going to get this completed with the dimpling right now, and we'll move. So the skin is also going to be deburred in the same way as the rib, and it's going to be cleaned similarly, but there's an extra step that I'll show in a minute. The next step in the process is going to be to deburr the part. So keep in mind that the most critical areas to deburr are mating surfaces. So if you have any doubt on which surfaces are going to be mating surfaces, you could do one of a couple things. I always recommend building as far ahead with clecos as possible, just to kind of get a good feel for the way the parts are going to go together, or deburr everything. So primarily you're looking for, you just kind of go along with your finger. Anything you can catch with your fingernail is a potential burr that needs to be removed. You're going to check your holes and make sure that there's no burrs here. A lot of the parts come fairly well deburred already. This part is one of those that falls into that category, but that's not the case all the time. So you do want to be diligent to make sure that you're paying attention for burrs. So for example, so the four primary deburring tools that I like to use are these right here. So for edges and kind of flat edges, maybe like this one, I prefer a file, and you just lightly touch the part and remove the burr like this. Your goal when you're deburring is always going to be remove the burr, not the material. That's the most critical part you can do here. You definitely do not want to weaken the integrity of the part by removing considerable amounts of material. For holes, you could use a little whirlybird deburring tool like this. It just goes into the hole and you give it a couple twists and it should remove the burr nicely. To be honest, I actually prefer just a large size drill bit. It works the same way. You put it into the hole that needs to be deburred, give it a couple twists like that, and same thing, removes the burr nicely. I don't recommend installing this into the drill and using it at a low speed, although you can if you've got tons and tons of holes to deburr. You can do that. Just be very, very careful, because your goal is to not countersink that hole. If you countersink it, you're effectively enlarging the hole, because the remaining material is so thin right there at that edge that your rivet's not going to have anything to grip onto. It might look good, but it's not structurally sound. So just be very careful with that and keep it in mind. And lastly, this deburring tool, I probably use this for about 70–80% of all of the deburring. It works well for your edges. You just drag it along like this to remove burrs. It also works well for larger diameter holes like this that your drill bit isn't large enough, or your deburring tool isn't large enough to handle that kind of hole. For this particular rib, once again, it's a fuel tank rib. These are not mating surfaces. They're just lightening holes to make the part lighter, as well as for this, it kind of lets fuel slosh between rib sections. So just keeping those things in mind, you'll go around your part, you'll find a process that works well for you, but just going around the part in the outer edges in a circle, make sure that I get to address everything. So you kind of hit everything like this. And also at this step of the process,
I like to just check to make sure that the dimpling hasn't caused any of your rib flanges to get a little out of whack. So you kind of look down it and make sure, you know, maybe right here there's a little bit of a high spot. So you take a pair of hand seamers or just anything with a flat surface without the lines cut into it for grip, because you don't want to mar the part in any way. And you just kind of bend that flange back so it's a nice smooth surface. You'll be able to see it when you cleco everything together if there's a protrusion kind of sticking out on your skins, but doing it now ahead of time is always better. And there are a little bit faster ways of deburring, maybe using a polishing wheel with a deburring, a polishing bench grinder with a deburring wheel on it. But I find that your best way to go is going to be everything by hand, because it gives you a really good familiarization with the part, and you can go around, and if there's any little peels of plastic that you may have missed, you'll notice it during this stage, and really it just gives you a better understanding of the part. The more you touch it with your hands, the more you work with it in depth. You might add, you know, 2% onto your time of getting it done, but you can get quick with the hand tools, and yeah, the more time you spend with the part, the better understanding you're going to have of it. So the next step here after we get this all deburred is going to be to clean it up. So I'll show you that next. So after you've got your part deburred, the final step before assembly is to clean the part thoroughly. For this, I use simple green aircraft cleaner and dilute it with water and put it into a spray container like this, and use some red Scotch-Brite to thoroughly clean the part here. The purpose of this step is basically just to get rid of any kind of oil, grease, grime from the manufacturing process. Even if the part looks clean, it's better to do this than to not. And using this Scotch-Brite actually helps just remove any kind of very small fine burrs that are left over, and because of the abrasive of the Scotch-Brite pad here. And in addition to that, it helps you just wipe off any kind of little metal shavings from deburring. If you're allodyning your parts, this step is going to be a little different, but for everything else, even if you're going to be priming your mating surfaces, this step is still necessary. You'll just prime after you've abraded, because that helps the paint adhesion. And so yeah, we'll basically, you just spray a light coat of the simple green and just lightly scrub it. You'll see all of the labeling starts to come off, all the kind of black imprints that were left from the aluminum manufacturer, and you just give it a thorough cleaning. Not too much. You don't have to rub it raw or anything, but just a thorough cleaning will get the job done. And then after we've scrubbed the whole part clean, we'll just rinse off the remaining simple green from it, dry it thoroughly, and we're ready to assemble. For information about allodyning, priming mating surfaces, and just overall corrosion protection, there's a separate video for that. So if you want to make that decision, go ahead and look into that video. We'll provide all that information to you. Cleaning your skins before assembly is going to be the same process as with the ribs. You're going to use the red Scotch-Brite and simple green aircraft cleaner. The only difference between the skins and the ribs is on the outside of your skins, and all of this, once again, is assuming you're not allodyning your parts. This does not apply if you are. So on your rivet lines, if you give it a little extra abrasion before you've riveted your skins on, this will help with paint adhesion. So just abrading that material just a little extra thoroughly right on your rivet lines will scuff up the material. You're going to have to do that on the whole part before you paint it anyway. But once your rivets are shot, and this is especially true of rivets that aren't countersunk, that rivet head makes it very difficult to abrade the material directly surrounding that rivet. So just doing it ahead of time before you've shot all your rivets will just help with the paint adhesion for down the line when that part of the build comes. So now when you hear me say in almost every video, the parts are unwrapped, deburred, cleaned, and dimpled where necessary, you'll know exactly what I mean and exactly what I've done. So now let's get to the fun part and start building.